Welcome to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fauscette. Each week, we interview experts in artificial intelligence, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. Our show today is The Missing Layer, Why Your AI Agents Need a Governance Plane. I'm joined by Logan Kelly, CEO of Waxell AI. Logan, welcome.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
So to get started, why don't we give us a little bit of background? Tell us a little about yourself, what led you to Waxell. And I know, this is not your first rodeo, as they say. You founded CallSine, AI-driven sales engagement platform that launched, autonomous sales agents before. So now you're working on a different level of governance end of it for agentic systems. What did you see while you were building this, deploying this? What drove you to this point?
Sure. Yeah. So I was in AI before it was cool with large language models, kind of blowing up with generative AI, specifically like in the nutrition space. And also was, that kind of led me to the B2B sales arena. And as, we started playing with like the GPT, whatever 3.5 in the early days of getting access to those APIs, it was like, whoa, we could do sales engagement kind of from the ground up with AI. I think a lot of people had that, kind of idea. And as we went through that growth trajectory, we realized that people didn't want to learn another software tool, right? Like we'd been using SalesLoft and HubSpot sales and all this. And so that's where we decided to go, after building every single day for, 2 years. It was like, we've got what we need to go, full self-driving, fully autonomous, agentic, and this was kind of early mid last year. And we had a lot of customers, which meant we had a lot of agents. And then all of a sudden, you're not asking the question of how do we get people to log in every day to use this. The agents are doing a lot of the work. And so right out of the gate, you have cost concerns, right? And then nobody's watching this stuff. So you have quality concerns. And then, you kind of keep going down that path and you realize like, if, we have a fairly small team, there's gotta be a big infrastructure, not necessarily to do the work, but to make sure that you can go to sleep every night knowing that you're not going to have, OpenAI or Anthropic or Grok bill that's through the roof, that you're not going to have customers saying, we just sent the same email 3,000 times to the same person, right? Never happened. But, those are things that when you start to bring autonomy into play, they can. And that was really where kind of my passion for this idea of like, what if you could safely run all this? What if you could, have the visibility to both optimize and assure that everything was happening right? And as I started talking about it, people were like, yeah, man, this is what we actually want that you're doing. And that's where Waxell came from.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. Over the last few years, we've talked about frameworks a lot, agent frameworks or applications that kind of sit around that layer. But we haven't really talked about this concept that you've had. And this year, governance is the hot topic, which is good. Once we're out of proof of concept and moving into scale, that certainly has both, as you mentioned, cost risk and brand and reputational risk. But this idea of a governance plane, I like the words, and it's a very specific choice that you've made, that you're sitting above the agent, the model, the integrations. Can you walk us through what a governance plane actually does, in practice, and why do you think the distinction matters for how businesses think about and deploy agents?
Yeah. So if you like when you're kind of building an agent, say you're using like a LangChain, the LangChain agent framework. I think when you're building functionality for the first time, a lot of the governance that you're doing is going to be kind of at that agent level. And so now you have an engineer who is building guardrails, building eval, building cost controls,
Yeah.
and they're kind of thinking through, all right, I want to make sure the agent does this and not that. And you want to give the agent the ability to still be probabilistic because that's the beauty of generative AI. But then you need to start kind of deterministic guardrails to be able to go down those. And so what a governance plane kind of at its core does is allows a developer to develop agents kind of what we call intent first. So being able to just build the functionality and not spend a lot of time on the boilerplate of, all right, I need to eval this rag generation and I need to make sure the token count through the, every single one of these runs over the course of a day isn't, ballooning too much. And it kind of shifts a lot of that responsibility to more of the, operations and the non-engineers, which allows developers and engineers to build agents that really do the job. And the other side of the business, or could be engineers, but have a plane where a lot of this can be auto instrumented, can be done kind of automatically and optimized, less at the code level.
I mean, if you think about business perspective on governance, we've always sort of thought of it as, as a way to record, to log, to sit on top of things after the fact. It's not something that you go, oh, I'm designing a system and here's the governance layer, right? It's an after the fact sort of thing. And I know when we were prepping for this, you told me that a lot of CTOs that you talk to now, they don't think they have a governance problem because they're not at scale yet, or they're not moving into production at scale. But that seems to be a big risk in my mind. And when you explained your ideas around it, you're saying that the time they realize you need it, it's too late because you didn't build it in. Why we'll deal with it when we get there kind of approach. Why is that dangerous in agentic systems?
I think so when we talk about governance, I think the really easy places to talk about are like cost and rag eval and these kinds of things. But then we're starting to see things like Claude Cowork, right, that has kind of access to local machines or file systems. And there was a story, I don't know how true it was, that an Amazon developer, an AI coding agent might have done something in production, right, that caused a hiccup. And so those start to become things like, how do we control what file systems an agent has access to? Which if you're thinking about like Active Directory and an enterprise and stuff, that's super easy for like a system admin to be like, you know what, this kind of entry level person doesn't get access to the financial reporting, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so that's like we've just talked about three of we have 26 different categories that we look at, that like from there, those 26, you might have 5 or 6 policies if you're doing this right. So you're talking for an agentic fleet having 200 or 300 policies. That's a really, really big kind of thing to think through. And I think when you're just running an agent locally, or you're just running an agent kind of ad hoc, those kind of things don't emerge until something happened that you didn't see, right? And I think that's one of the things that is kind of it's going to really kind of bite people when they don't have this. But I don't think they need to, because everything in agentic governance, there's an analog to enterprise or business system governance as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about deterministic, and I know we've been pretty comfortable talking about guardrails because I think that's an easy concept to go like, oh, I don't want it to go outside this boundary, I don't want it to go outside that boundary, but in the end, you're right. Probabilistic is, I mean, that's the point. If it's not
Mhm.
agentic, it's not an agent, then you're
It's a
not going
workflow.
to get that long term value, right? It doesn't make sense.
Right.
But in the deterministic world, we had observability tools like data dog, and plays to log things, to track things, to
Mhm.
watch things. When you're talking about an autonomous agent, a probabilistic agent, that's different, right? The behavior is different, and I mean, a bug in an API endpoint, you can trace that, you can fix it. It didn't do any damage, it just didn't work, and so
Mhm. Mhm.
generally that's fine. But when an agent, you know, when an agent makes a mistake at machine speed, you're talking about a whole different level of risk. I mean, can it can, from a cost perspective, go into some sort of iterative loop that burns up tokens and goes off script, and that could be a terrible failure. Or maybe it has a conversation with a customer and makes a bad decision in the way it applies some of the boundaries that you had around it. I mean, how does that change the governance needs? And for monitoring is not governance, right? In this definition. So what does that look like?
So the kind of first step, the nice thing when we're talking about like governing agents is the kind of we're standing on the shoulder of the giants, right? Who have built these beautiful observability platforms, right? And
Yeah.
showed kind of the power of auto instrumentation, the power of having these entities that are kind of embedded in the system and looking through that system, and
Mhm.
because that's where
Right.
data coming into the system to then be able to say, okay, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
When we get into governance, though, that, as you said, that kind of HTTP request that an API fails, and maybe the feature doesn't work for the user, or there's this kind of one-off access that shouldn't have happened that can then be
Mhm.
rectified with an agent. Like all of a sudden the agentic loop doesn't exit and it's trying to fix the problem, and you need to be able to fix that. Or you're having this conversation, and the beautiful thing about governance is like we look at it, so I think a lot of people look at it so terminally, right? So
Mhm.
agent comes out of bounds, it should exit and kind of fail out and alert somebody. But I like the idea of governance, like you're having a agent to like an interactive agent to customer chat, right?
Yeah.
And the governance layer can intercept, say, rag retrieval, auto grounding. Okay, was this right? No, and then it just errors it out and asks the agent to go try again, right? And so now you've kind of got this more of a manager employee relationship between governance and agent than just this thing failed. So we talk about failure modes, but failure modes don't have to be terminal in the sense of an agent execution.
Yeah. And I mean, terminal in a deterministic world is just broken, right? I mean, that's not a
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
that is the thing. It's
mm-hmm.
annoying. It could cause
Yeah.
problems downstream, but it's not the same level of risk, either from
Mm-hmm,
an economic sense or from a brand risk. We were talking in our prep call. You mentioned Gong and had a nice analogy around how Gong, is really powerful in the world of sales. It records, analyzes every call so that sales managers can, after the fact, review it and come back and help coach the salesperson and how they could do things better and how to improve that
mm-hmm.
sort of thing. But when we think about agents, we first of all, we do still sort of think about them as technology, not as digital employees, which I think is a mistake to begin with.
Mm-hmm,
But if
mm-hmm.
you move them into that idea, then you've got a digital employee that thinks and acts at machine speed, and yet we're not building even a coaching mechanism into that process up front. So, you know, let alone doing that in real time, right? So, I mean, what do you
Right.
is that a blind spot, and why? And
Yeah.
then how does real time governance, what does that really how does that work? What does that look like?
I think it's the coolest frontier of all of this. You know, as we talked about the kind of the grounding piece, right? So
Yeah.
rag retrieval, and we'll just use this as an example. Like a lot of agents are retrieving, you know, in these nice like compound multi-agent workflows. They're kind of building the prompt in the to query the vector database in
Mhm.
real time.
Yep.
And so all of a sudden you could have a quality input output governance layer, which you know we've spent a lot of time on, which is pretty cool. And so then it's like, okay, what's the retrieval scoring? You know, oh, it seems like the retrieval scoring is a little bit low. Let's ship that back and give the agent the opportunity before it
Mhm.
just fails out to then, and then as you keep on going down that path, now you can have quality scoring. Now you can have input output, you know,
Mm.
checking on things like PI and all that kind of stuff. So what we believe, and what I'm incredibly passionate about, is like governance doesn't just need to fail or block something. It
Right.
can say, hey, this is a little bit off. And if you've built your agent with a nice like agentic loop, then that can be fed back into the agentic loop as input. And I think for though for that world to really be, you know, uh, realized, it can't just be engineers doing this. This needs to be, you know,
Mm.
operations people and product people able to be a part of the governance, you know, kind of layer creation and management.
Mm. I mean, I've been thinking about this lately, and I wrote a couple of articles about governance. And one of the concepts that I had, because I've worked a lot with customer service, customer support, customer experience
Yeah,
kind of
cool.
systems, right? Is that if you have an agent and you're putting it in a situation that it's going to interact with a customer, you want it to reflect your brand, but it's like
Mhm.
cultural. It's not like agent be nice. It's like agent inside of this sort of space. You're fine, but outside of that space, you're veering into an area that's not going to reflect correctly on what we want with the customer.
Mhm.
So I mean, it's not just a failure or a mistake, but it is literally how it represents you in this. And I mean, that's hard for an agent, right? What does be nice mean? It could mean, don't say any curse words, but it also could mean give all refunds in a hurry because it'll make the customer happy, right? I mean,
Mhm.
which is a bad thing. So I called
Right.
it a real-time semantic interceptor, right? The idea that I should
Mhm.
be able to filter agents' outputs before they reach the customer, but do it in real time so that we can create those loops that you mentioned and feedback. And I
Mhm.
know we both sort of adamantly agreed that that makes sense, right? But what are the practical mechanics of that though? Because that's hard. And intercepting, evaluating against some kind of framework, and then how do you do that without introducing latency in the system that actually makes it visible to the customer?
Right. Right. I think latency, because you could do this in a uh, the most robust way, right? And then you're gonna and you could do this, and I think you could do this inside of the actual agent itself.
Right.
And that's going to create an enormous amount of latency, right? Unless you're
Right.
using, you know, especially if you're married to frontier models, right? Where like I'm a big believer in like Grok with a Q. They've
Yeah.
got unbelievably fast inference, which is great, and I think there's a place for that fast inference, very specific kind of eval that's happening inside of that. And so
Right.
that's really where what we've thought a lot about is like we talk about grounding, we talk about kind of golden sample eval and these kinds of things. And then also kind of that feedback of being able to feed back to the governance layer. This seemed to work and this didn't seem to work. And so that the way we see it is eval should be done as fast as possible, and eval
Mhm.
should be very customizable in the governance layer. And then feedback should be able to be sent back into the governance layer as an appended to the actual agent execution, so that a user, and then in our platform, and this is like an observability thing, and there are other observability platforms. So this isn't a total kind of Waxell pitch, but the idea is then you can start to look through, okay, so the eval is happening, here's what the inputs, the outputs, here's the retrieval, here's the scores, here's the kind of observability piece of the platform, here's the feedback. Now I can start to deterministically, as the kind of ops team, product team, engineering team, and now we could go and potentially update the actual system prompting and all that kind of stuff. So to answer that question, that's very much an eval in real time, and then that's observability and using the feedback data, and then that's optimizing the agent kind of at the code level or the system level. So because what we're really talking about is the efficacy of the entire system, and that's part governance, part development, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of thought about it in like if an air traffic controller were sitting watching planes land, right? You have this sort of three-dimensional space that the plane should be in as it lands, and you've vectored it into that space. And as long as it's in a certain area in that space, you're good. But
Yeah.
if it and if it went outside that space, obviously you're bad. But there's this sort of zone around the edges that if it's moving in that direction, that's also not good. And so you could correct it before you're in the deterministic place, and that's much more effective. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that's where the complexity. I would respond to that in two different ways. I think there's the eval kind of at the end, like at the gate at the end, right? Is this right? But if we're thinking about multi-agent systems, if we're thinking about multi-step agents, they're doing multiple tools that are kind of all working together. If you can govern upstream, and so you're kind of making sure that this tool or this step is as accurate as it should be, then I think a lot of the downstream stuff gets taken care of. So I like the idea of like when it's 50 miles, when the plane's 50 miles out, is it completely off course? That's where it's easier to be like, hey man, maybe I'm not a pilot, but
that's a guardrail though. That's bad, right? We know that's not good.
Yeah. So if you can start to really govern each decision, is the point, then I think that output gets a lot easier to ensure is correct.
Yeah. I mean, to me, that makes a lot of sense if I can put it into that framework. Now, when we were talking before, you talked about how you thought governance needed to be accessible to regular employees, not just to the engineering team, right? And operational people, they understand business rules, they understand what customers expect, they understand the culture of the company, right? But they sort of get pushed into the back when you talk about building agents, because in most systems now, there's certainly some no code, low code platforms that are coming out, but in most of them, it's a very technical bit of work to build the agent, deploy the agent, test it, all that, right? So how do you make that accessible to a non-engineer? What does it look like to a business operations person, not a IT or developer, when you're talking about setting policies for agents?
Yeah. So, we are because we were born out of a sales engagement company, right, that went into the agentic world. We were kind of born out of this place where we have really, really smart people that aren't developers, but who know this is what good outreach is. This is what, a good retrieval looks like from a RAG database, et cetera, in a UI. And so we started this process being able to create interfaces that it's understandable what this stuff means, right? What directory should an agent have access to, right? There's a shell script, of that, or you could say, or the UI could just strip away all of the kind of commands and just say, hey, what directories in the system should this have access to, right?
Right.
What words or what, what scores should we look at? And then there's a little bit of training on like, when we're talking about grounding, what does a score look like in a RAG? But that's an easy conversation with a smart person, right? It's really about how do you build an interface that they can then interact with, and then the challenge and the thing that I'm the most excited about is how do you make that dynamic policy now be able to interact with the agent without the developer having a bunch of overhead and without the operations or the business user having a bunch of training overhead. And that's the path we're down. And I think that is the most important thing, I think, from a autonomous agents being accepted by both the security and operations side of the business, as opposed to just a developer who's like pumped that they build this agent that could do this really cool thing.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about them as digital employees versus, technology, then I'm a manager in a business. I want to be able to understand the behavior of my human employees and my digital employees and make sure they're all aligned in the right direction to get the outcome I want. And that's not me writing code. That's me, understanding the way the business works. Right. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've done is we've built an agent on our platform that a user can say, you could click a button and say, hey, what policies do I need? Right. And then now it can walk you through it. Or you could just have a conversation. Hey, I'm worried about costs with this agent. And, that's the beauty of being an agentic company is you should be able to have an agent that makes it easy for a business user who, is incredibly intelligent, just might not know what, how to write a Python function. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be able to govern agents, right?
Yeah. Well, no. I mean, just simple things with agents. Like I was building one the other day to just do a really simple thing, go through my email in the morning and tell me which should be archived and what I need to answer. And I kept, it kept doing the thing. It's I'm executing what you told me to do, but I couldn't find it. Like I literally couldn't find where it put it. So I mean, rather than having to go back and look at code, I could just go, hey, I can't find this. Where is it? And then it goes
what
through
command did it
run?
run?
Well, you didn't give me permissions to do this, so I could put it here and let's do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's because I didn't want to go write code. I just wanted to be able to read what it wrote. Like that's
yeah. Cool. Were you Claude coding or what was your
no, actually that one was in Notion, but
there?
I do Claude.
Oh, cool.
I admit I do vibe code in Claude quite a bit. No, I admit I'm addicted to co-work. That's my thing. So
co-work is the greatest. Yeah. Our company has built a pretty wild kind of mesh between all of our co-work agents, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I admit I'm addicted to it. I've used it for all kinds of interesting things. So when we were talking the other day, you said something. I'm going to quote you, so just so you know. But I like this a lot, and I wanted to kind of break this up a little bit. But you said something like everybody thinks the features are the most exciting part of agents. And I think it's being able to have agents in your organization and have the teams responsible for them to be able to go to sleep at night. I mean, that's a different way of framing the value proposition. But how do you sell that message to companies who, that are still kind of look at what our agent can do kind of phase of excitement versus the kind of more operational framing there?
I think the conversations that we've been having, and I think it's pretty easy to kind of turn these into like nobody's thinking about governance, this kind of stuff. I think governance this year is going to be the phrase like generative AI. Everything is generative AI. Then there's going to be a bunch of governance companies who I'm so excited to see what Claude Code spits out for people with their governance things that can kind of stop an agent. But what we're seeing is a lot of people, especially with like Claude Code and OpenClaw and this kind of stuff, is over the last couple of weeks, and this is because AI moves so fast, right? Over the last couple of weeks, it's gotten a lot easier because the stories are crazy coming out, right? It deleted all my emails. It, ran up a $3,000 bill overnight. And so, but then if we get into the more, kind of serious place, I think we are starting to see these like, because there's a governance, and then there's a security kind of implication of this. And when you look at things like the MCP layer, which I think is a lot more approachable for a lot of companies, these are pretty easy to attack layers, right? There's like the MCP rug pull attack and these kinds of things. Like, so I think people are quickly coming around to the idea that there needs to be governance. What's the most exciting thing is when we get into these conversations and it's like, whoa, you could do this and you could do that. And so it's more of like, starts with cost, it starts with access, it starts with, quality. And then it goes into, well, you could scope this agent to have access to this, and the same agent, but used by a different user, has access to that. And so it's really telling the story in a quick enough amount of time that you could literally govern everything. That's the challenge for how much governance can actually impact a business, as opposed to just monitoring cost.
Yeah. This year, and I've been thinking about governance a lot too, and I know I told you that before, but and one of the this concept that made to me helps me really think through this is I've started talking about governance by design. So rather than after the fact, we need to build governance into the infrastructure from the beginning, and that because otherwise you're just putting band-aids on problems that have already happened, and that's not good at all, especially at machine speed and at scale, right? So it seems like your platform embodies that to me. How do you think about the relationship there between early stage governance by design, or and the ability to scale agentic systems confidently over time?
So I think this breaks out to two kind of sides of the house. I think for agents to be built effectively, engineers need to be able to build in what I would call like intent first. What do you want the agent to do? What does it need access to? Kind of user testing and all that kind of stuff. It is a lot of overhead for them to just, okay, I want it to be able to traverse a file system and then be like, well, let me go get, especially the enterprise, let me go, understand all of the directories I need to block that agent from. It's a lot of work. And so if you're gonna move at the speed of AI, you have to have a part of the house that's thinking about, what do I want the agent to do? What's the functionality? What's the skills? And then you need to be able to also have people thinking about, as we're testing and kind of gearing towards deployment, what are kind of the pitfalls of the agent, right? And so I think this is where things like auto instrumentation, this is where things like observability at the beginning really come into play. So if you want to think about governance from the door, you need to have your agents instrumented in a way that the engineers can do what engineers are good at, and then security can get involved, user testing can get involved, all that kind of stuff. And that's why I think control planes and governance layers as a concept are so much more powerful than making a developer think. That's a lot of cognitive load to be like, am I owning where this thing goes, or am I building the thing so that that really works? And I've got team behind me to make sure that it, kind of plays in the right sandbox.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to me, that's it seems a much more logical approach when I think about how I want to lay out an enterprise system. That one of the pieces in that platform or structure is, in fact, a governance platform or plane, whatever you want to call it. But it is an end to end piece that has to be there. Just like I have to have a data layer, I need an agent service bus, I have to have communication layers. I mean, all those things, they have to be there, business logic, et cetera, right? But the governance piece, if you're leaving that out, that's a big problem.
Yeah. And I just want to say, I think like once engineers start playing with the governance like tooling, there's like, I mean, even internally, we kind of, we're constantly innovating on different ways that our governance layer could impact our own agents, right? And that's kind of I think the fun. That's why I think this is such a cool space. And it's like once you start realizing how a governance layer, control plane, can actually reduce some of the need to like think through everything as you're developing an agent, because you know you have these backstops in place, you can actually move faster in building cooler, more flexible, probabilistic agents when you're not thinking, well, do I need the guardrail, deterministically in the code here, or can I lay that off to this, layer that I can use.
Yeah. Well, I said before, I've for years looked at customer experience and how, companies can build up the
Hmm.
interactions with customers and build positive, reflection there. There's a lot of risk in having agents involved in with customers, right? I mean, that's your biggest asset, and you have to worry about it. And
Yeah.
an autonomous agent talk, with agency, so actual autonomy is talking to your customers. You don't necessarily know what they've said until after they've said it, unless of course you've done this kind of proactive intercepting, I guess. There's a lot of brand risk, more, maybe more so than technical problems, right? So
Mm.
I do have in the audience, there's always a lot of CX leaders, COOs that listen. What should they be asking for, demanding from their AI teams now to protect that customer relationship and customer experience?
I think this comes back to the whole idea of being able to have governance and observability that's outside of the engineering teams, right? So
Mm,
having the ability to be a part of the construction of the agent early phase, having the visibility of here's what the input was, here's what the output was,
mm,
having like when we're talking about customer data and potentially like uh, discounting or refunding and
mm,
stuff, having the ability to govern how many times an agent does that, having the ability to really fine tune the maximum amount of turns that
mm,
a conversation can have, those kinds of things. And so I think that the easy kind of, because we're talking about the control plane or the governance layer, is you should be asking for a governance layer, but I think more specifically, you should be asking for how can me or my teams become a part of
mm,
the kind of both the construction through these visibility and governance layers. And then from there, really being able to say, okay, I'm worried about this. What policy can we put in place? I'm worried about this.
yeah.
What policy can we put in place? And that in the teams that I've worked with, that is like such a big moment when CX
Mm,
operations can be like, whoa, I have so much more power to be able to help the dev team that's
right.
building this thing that's never been, used before and is
Yeah.
increasing the customer experience, reducing costs, all that kind of stuff. So I think that's where the kind of having the ability to inject yourself in a less kind of code review, or just like, can we make it do this instead of that? Well, what if you had a control panel that you could help with that? And
Right.
and I think that's really
Mm,
powerful, and it's super cool to see, with the
yeah.
teams we work with.
I mean, you get excited about. I know, I talked to a lot of business leaders that, like, you get excited about the what could happen. The potential, the possibilities
Mhm.
there. But it's like more than just awareness. You got to be involved in the whole
Mhm.
process as a business leader. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I go back to it. It truly is the coolest thing when you can start as the leader being a part of actually impacting what this world is. And we've seen agents
Mm,
just absolutely transform experiences. And why not have the kind of layer to be able to be part of it?
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's pull out the crystal ball for a minute, because I want to at least leave the audience with a little bit of think about this in the future, right? So, agentic
Mhm.
systems, we know over the last year, now into this year, we're moving from proof of concept into actual production, which means we have to start to see scale and scale up through those operations and business. So, with more organizations moving into that scale up phase versus experimental phase, what does the governance landscape need to look like, say, in the next 12 to 18 months? And in AI terms, 12 to 18 months is forever, I know, but but where does that look like? And then how does Waxell fit into that evolution?
So the two things that I think are going to happen a lot more from an agent perspective is I think autonomy is, it's where I see the most fun with agents. But we just talked about co-work and Claude Code and these kinds of things. And so there is this I think we moved from the Microsoft Copilot, kind of idea to this
Right.
co-work where it's actually able to deliver. And we see internally, employees not getting replaced. We see employees being able to do, 10x the quality, 10x the output. It's just ridiculous, right? I mean, you're using co-work. And so if we look at, there's going to be autonomy and there's going to be co-work. And so if you start to think about autonomy at scale and co-work at scale, and so if you start to think about that, what's the kind of thing you're going to need to really kind of instrument on the co-work side of things, right? It's what communication is co-work having? What channels can it communicate outside of co-work? What data does it have access to? Is there potentially IP and PII kind of leakage into the context? Maybe it doesn't get leaked into, some email or something, but if it's in the context, there's some developer that might be able to print that log in a server, right?
Yep.
And so those are the kinds of things. And I think all of those are still valuable on the autonomy side, but those are on the co-work side of things. Those are the things that, we're going to have to really lock down. On the autonomy side, it's really, we talk about the kind of chats with customers, right? It's being able to govern, kind of proactively the quality, the whole pipeline, where is something falling down and being able to rectify that before it gets to the end, and, we told it to clean the floor and it starts mopping the ceiling, right? And so I think that's where there's a whole set of kind of autonomous agent-based, cost and things that maybe you would catch earlier in the co-work model that you're not going to catch on the autonomous agent side. So I think that would be my answer. Yeah. I don't know if that's what you're looking for.
No, that makes sense. I think you're right. And just, having that awareness and then starting to think about it in a more systematic way and a more architectural way. Yeah. So, I mean, that's all the time we have for the conversation today. Really fun conversation and timely, because certainly this is something that should be top of mind for all the companies that are moving from experiment into production. But before I let you go, one thing I like to do at the end of every show is, ask for a recommendation for the audience, somebody that you think would be beneficial for them to follow, to check out, maybe a blogger, author, entrepreneur, whoever you think would be useful from their perspective to help them learn and grow in this space.
Yeah, I think Dharmesh Shah and HubSpot, the HubSpot guy. Every time I pop into LinkedIn, and LinkedIn for some reason thinks that every time he posts something, I should get notified about it. And what's interesting is there's so the hype cycle is ridiculous in AI. There's a lot of people who say a lot of stuff that have never written a line of code, who have never managed systems at scale. And so it's always refreshing to see, him kind of live streaming or live LinkedIn blogging his experiences. And he's writing code. And so that's really cool to see. So that is a nice, you get a little update every day from him, and he's done some cool stuff in his.
And it's real stuff that he's actually doing. And I think that's, rather than theoretical, he's out there working on it all the time. So I think that's exciting. Yeah. That's a great recommendation. Yeah. Thanks. And Logan, thanks for joining today. Really appreciate your insights.
Yeah. No, it's been great to have a conversation with you. You've obviously been doing a lot of work on this side, so we could go a couple levels deeper. So that's really exciting. So I appreciate you having me.
Great. Thanks. And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the show. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a review to help others find us. For more research on AI and other software, check out arianresearch.com. If you're an expert in AI, generative AI, or business automation, either as a provider or an end user, email your information to disambiguation@arianresearch.com. Don't forget to join us next week. Disambiguation is an Arian Research production. I'm Michael Fauscette, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.